Boldwood presents A French Inheritance, written by Jennifer Bohnet and read by Julia Franklin. Love is like a tree. It grows of its own accord. It puts down deep roots into our whole being. Victor Hugo. Chapter 1. 5 years ago. Elliot Belgrave stood in the middle of the farmyard that apparently formed the heart of his older brother's newest business venture, in the countryside behind Cannes, in the south of France, and shook his head. "Adam, you can't be serious about turning this into a desirable, expensive property complex," he said, before turning to look again at the various buildings that were littered around. He assumed they had all been outbuildings of the original 50-hectare farm, but now they were basically ruins. Some had roofs, some were open to the elements. Windows were broken, doors missing, and broken terracotta roof tiles were strewn everywhere. All were covered in foliage, mainly ivy, making it impossible to judge how bad a condition they were truly in. The stable block, situated a little way from the main complex, looked to be in a similarly distressed condition. The old farmhouse itself, standing at the head of the farm driveway overlooking the desolation, had survived the last 2 decades in a better condition. Its roof was still intact, and all its doors and windows were in place, unbroken, but with only flakes left of the olive-green paint that had once covered the doors, window frames and shutters. Elliot turned to his sister-in-law. "Lucy, I know it's too late, you've already bought the farm, but can't you talk him out of this madcap scheme? Put the place back on the market. I know he's an experienced builder and good at it, but he's never tackled a project as big as this before." Lucy smiled and shook her head. "I tried, believe me, I tried. But in the end I agree with Adam. To rescue this sad place, to bring it to life again, would be a good thing to do. So, together, this is what we will do." She pointed at the farmhouse. The house itself had been lived in until about a year ago, when the old couple who owned the estate died. Parts of it date from the early 1800s, but thankfully it isn't listed. And Adam has promised me we'll do the essentials in there first. Update the kitchen, put a modern bathroom in, and sort out a bedroom for us and one the girls can use when they visit, to make life easier, before we start to rebuild everything else. In the meantime, we're camping out in 2 of the rooms. I put you in what will be the girls' room on a camp bed." "How do the girls feel about this place? Have they seen it yet?" "They've seen the estate agent's brochure, so know there's a lot of work to do. But they haven't visited yet," Lucy said. "I think, like me, they've simply accepted it as Adam's midlife crisis project." She smiled at Elliot. "Is that how you feel about it?" he asked quietly. "No. For me, it's more empty nest syndrome, and something for us to tackle together. Besides, who doesn't like the thought of living on the French Riviera?" "Can you afford to do it, though? It's going to cost a hell of a lot of euros." Adam sighed. "Come on, bro, give me some credit for planning stuff and making sure there's enough money in the pot. As well as these buildings, there are 3 or 4 more cottages spread throughout the land. The plan is to have at least a couple of them renovated within the first 3 years and rent them out. And then that will slowly finance the rest of the project. If the worst happens and money becomes too tight, we can sell them on individually. Re-establishing the vineyard, renovating and renting some of these outbuildings to local artisans." He gestured at the ruins clustered around the driveway where they were standing. "Is also in the plan to bring an income in." "Establishing a pépinière is in the plans too," Lucy added. people like buying trees, shrubs, and, down here, decorative olive trees for their villas. We've also got a secret project in the pipeline which we can't talk about yet. Something that's quite new in the south of France." Adam smiled and tapped the side of his nose. "So secret you can't tell me?" Elliot asked. "You'll be the first to know when it's sorted, I promise. Be a couple of years before we can do that, I suspect." "And we're going to do YouTube videos, showcasing how we're doing things," Lucy interrupted. "If we can get enough people interested in following our progress week by week, that'll bring in some money." "You make it sound so feasible, so easy, but—" Elliot shook his head again. Adam put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "You know how much we both love this part of France, and want to live here, and now seems to be the right moment to do something like this. The girls are off living their own lives now they've finished uni. Neither of us want to spend the rest of our lives regretting not stepping out of our comfort zone and doing something different." "But you could lose everything," Elliot said. "But we could end up with something so much more. Think of this place as our pension fund. 15 years down the line and this complex will be worth a lot more than it is today. And it could, just as easily, be totally worthless. And you've lumbered yourself with a huge debt. Let's face it, most of these buildings look like they're ready to crash down to the ground." Elliot waved his arm at the ruins. "I'm sorry if I sound pessimistic here. I'm just trying to be realistic. You're taking such a huge gamble." Adam gave his brother an exasperated look. "I get that it's not something you and Robin would ever consider, but Lucy and I will make it work. We're a good team. So if you could find it in your heart to wish us well, even though you do not share our passion for the place or see our vision, that would be good. If I could persuade you to pick up a hammer and knock down a few walls whilst you're here, that'd be even better." Elliot smothered a sigh. The phrase, "we're a good team," had cut through his thoughts. Married for 25 years, Adam and Lucy had a great marriage, whereas he and Robin... Elliot gave himself a mental shake. Now was not the time to allow his thoughts to run wild down that particular route, before smiling at Adam and Lucy. "Okay, I'll push all my worries over this place to one side and wish you both good luck. Or should I say, bonne chance. I'll even come and give you a hand when I can. Starting now. Where's that hammer?" Elliot didn't add that he'd welcome the chance to vent his anger and frustration on something. It might help him to become calmer before he talked to them and asked their advice about the state of his marriage, which he planned to do over a glass of wine later. Chapter 2. Present Day. The incongruity of two major life events happening on the same day didn't immediately register with Briony. When an American company had taken over Raise Your Hand auctions a few weeks ago, and serious talk about redundancies had become a coffee break topic, she'd had something else on her mind: her impending divorce. She'd sat through the necessary legal meetings with the new bosses, looked at the redundancy figure she was entitled to, put the date of her final day at work in the diary, and tried to think hopefully about the future, which would begin once her divorce was finalised. Who would have guessed that her decree absolute would have landed in her life on the same day as her final day at work? Briony and her best friend at work, Maeve from accounts, walked out of the building for the last time, holding their few belongings. As the doors with their over-the-top Fort Knox security-type system slammed behind her, Briony flinched, shut out forever. "Commiseration coffee?" Maeve said, nodding in the direction of the cafe, where they habitually got their lunch sandwiches. Briony nodded and followed Maeve across the road and into the cafe. The two of them sipped their coffees, both deep in their own thoughts. A decent reference, but 6 months' pay isn't going to go far, Maeve said resignedly. You're a good accountant. You ran the accounts department brilliantly. I know you'll be snapped up once word gets round that you're available, Briony said. Maeve shrugged. Hope so. Both kids are off to college soon, and you know how much that costs parents these days. Briony did know, but only because it had been a major concern of Maeve's for weeks now. Perhaps it was a small mercy, now that she was divorced, and as much as she had longed for a family, babies had never been on the agenda for Marcus. She gave Maeve a sympathetic smile before taking a last sip of her coffee and replacing the mug on the table. They say things happen in threes, don't they? I did wonder what the third disaster was going to be for me after Granny Giselle dying and my divorce. Turned out to be redundancy. And guess what arrived earlier this morning? My decree absolute. Well, that's good, isn't it? Yes, I should be celebrating, but... Briony shrugged. Oh, Briony. Maeve reached out a hand and touched Briony's briefly. I know the last few months have been hard for you, but you are better off without Marcus in the long term. Your gran was in her 80s, and you say she'd had a good life. As for this redundancy, look on it as giving you total freedom. You're free now to have a completely new beginning in both your love life and your career. You're free to do your own thing. I wish I could say the same, but there are too many responsibilities still to walk away from. Maybe once the girls finish college. Briony looked at her curiously. You're happy with Brian and the girls, though, aren't you? You wouldn't change your marriage or your family life, would you? Maeve shook her head. Of course not. I don't want to be without either of them. But I would like to think that one day I can do something different. Ever had a holiday on a narrowboat? No, Briony said, surprised at the change of subject. We took the girls a couple of years ago. It was wonderful, gliding along the canal, all the wildlife, the birds, so peaceful and yet invigorating. I'd love to live like that, exploring places, meeting new people. Maeve sighed. Like I said, when the girls leave home, maybe I can persuade Brian to sell up and buy a canal boat. She smiled at Briony and shrugged. Dreams, eh? Briony nodded in agreement, but found herself inwardly wondering where her own dreams had gone over the last few years. Are you going to start job hunting straight away? Maeve asked. I am. Definitely. But Mum and I are supposed to be going to France to sort Granny Giselle's things out. Mum's had a letter from the French notaire, and he needs a rendezvous with her. And we also have to decide whether we want anything from the cottage before putting it on the market. Your mum doesn't fancy keeping it as a holiday home, or even living in it full time. Lots of people would love the opportunity to live in the south of France. Briony shook her head. She hasn't suggested it. I'd miss her if she did that, so selfishly. I hope that doesn't happen, although I suppose I could go for holidays. After they'd finished their coffees, they hugged each other goodbye, promised to keep in touch, and Maeve set off for the bus stop, whilst Briony walked slowly back to her new, meant-to-be temporary place, deep in thought. She'd expected that her 7-year tenure as team manager would keep her safe from redundancy. In the 8 years she'd been with the auction house, as well as managing her team, she'd also gained the grand-sounding title, Deputy Sales Manager. In reality, She'd organised everything for the general auctions the company held both in Bristol and the surrounding area. This was the year she'd hoped the word deputy would be lost, that she'd be awarded a pay rise, and that she would become the sales manager when Todd retired at the end of the year. The plans she'd started to think about for the rest of her life when the divorce was finalised hadn't factored in the practical necessity of finding a new job. Briony arrived back at her current flat, deep in thought. She'd taken the 6-month short-hold rental lease on a furnished one-bedroom flat in a new build not far from work as a stopgap when she and Marcus had separated. 4 months down the line, she still didn't think of it as a home. It was just a place to eat, sleep, and go to work from. Once the divorce was done and dusted, she'd planned to get on the property ladder with a 2-bedroom flat in Clifton Village, with a view of the suspension bridge. Property brochures were piled on the bedside table. Bedtime reading that had been sending her to sleep with a happy smile, dreaming of her future home. Had today scuppered her plan? It would definitely delay it. No job equaled no mortgage. Marcus had bought the flat they'd lived in just before they were married, and over the 8 years they were together, she'd paid half of the mortgage. When it all fell apart, Marcus had told her bluntly that he had every intention of staying there. His fury, when the divorce lawyers had worked out the sum she was entitled to in her divorce settlement, was unsuppressed. Petty revenge meant that he'd got rid of the expensive, state-of-the-art coffee machine that she'd treated herself to for a birthday one year, before she'd had a chance to collect it. Inside the flat, Briony placed her things on the kitchen table next to her laptop. She took out of her bag the envelope containing the decree absolute that she'd pounced on so happily this morning, telling herself, "My new life begins today," and placed it on top of the debris from her working life. Because now, that new life couldn't start. Briony pulled out a kitchen chair and sat at the table. She needed to get organised and at least make a plan to try to kickstart job hunting and put some sort of money-saving strategy in place. She also needed to start to figure out something to do for the rest of her life. Or, at the very least, the next few months, getting back on an even keel. Of course, making appointments to view the flat she'd been eyeing on Rightmove wasn't going to happen now. Instead, she'd be scrolling through LinkedIn and other job pages on the internet. While she waited for the laptop to boot up, she took the mobile out of her bag and called her mum. Jeannie Aubert answered almost immediately. "Everything okay? You don't normally ring from work." "Last day today. I'm now officially unemployed." "I know you were really happy there," Jeannie said. "Still, looking on the bright side, you're free to have a complete change if you want to. Do something different. Follow your dream. You haven't had a proper holiday for a couple of years. Now you can." "I suppose so," Briony said. "But I do need to start job hunting straight away. I doubt that I'm going to find a job quickly." "What with your divorce and now redundancy, you deserve a break. Take time to reflect, not rush into another job." I had all sorts of plans for life after Marcus, when the divorce was finished. New clothes, weekends in London and Paris, exploring the Louvre, seeing lots of live theatre and concerts. Briony tailed off. "And now you have unlimited time to do all those things," Jeannie said, "starting with our visit to France. We can stay for as long as you like now." "But all my plans need money." Briony let out a frustrated sigh. "Money that I won't have if I don't have a regular income. So, finding another job has to be my priority before I can even think about those plans again." "But you have your redundancy money." Jeanie said. And what about your emergency rainy day fund you've been squirreling money away in for years? Oh, I can't touch that. It's my security for the future. If I blow it on holidays and clothes and enjoying myself, it won't be there for any rainy days that do happen. Briony shook her head. No, I'll have to put everything on hold until I found another job. There was silence for several long seconds, and Briony began to wonder if the call had been disconnected when Jeanie said quietly, Briony, don't you think your rainy day has arrived? Losing your adored granny, a heartbreaking divorce, and now redundancy. I'd call those three things a veritable rainstorm. Give yourself a break. Follow your dreams. Use your rainy day money. Live a little. There was a silence for several seconds. Right, I'm taking an executive decision on your behalf. I'm off to book our flights to France for 1 day next week. And then I'll ring Lucy at the farm to ask her if she has the time to air the cottage a little. Even as she went to protest that it was too soon, Briony realised her mum had already finished the call. Ruefully, rubbing a hand across her face and accepting her mother's impetuous decision, she wandered into the sitting room and stood staring thoughtfully out at the small garden, with its shrubs and benches the developers had optimistically provided as a community garden. Briony had yet to set foot down there, but she could see an elderly couple sitting on one of the benches having a sandwich, enjoying the sunshine, and making the most of the open space. If she didn't get a job quickly, maybe she'd have lunch down there sometimes, when they got back from France. Was this redundancy truly a rainy day in her life, like everyone seemed to regard it? In her mind, rainy days consisted of accidents that threw one into catastrophic circumstances. Being made redundant did feel like a catastrophe to her, but not totally catastrophic, if that even made sense, because she knew she had enough money to survive. But if she spent the money and then couldn't get a job within, say, 6 months, then that would be a real catastrophe. Her rainy day savings were healthy, despite Marcus trying to persuade her over the years to invest in something other than ISAs and bank accounts with their low interest. She'd only ever mentioned her premium bonds to him once, when he'd decried the 0 interest they paid unless your number came up. She'd never told him when several of her numbers had come up over the years. Not with huge amounts, £50 here and there, 200 a couple of times, money she'd had reinvested instantly in more bonds. He'd been keen enough to take some of them off her, though, when the lawyers fought over divorce assets. But realistically, she knew she had enough savings to fall back on for a few months. Thinking about her mum, pointing out she was free to have a complete change if she wanted, free to follow her dream, was fine. Except for one thing. Briony couldn't remember when she'd last had a desire to do something different. Definitely not in the last few years she'd been married to Marcus. She'd enjoyed her job in the auction house, where no day was alike, and she met so many different people in the course of organising the sales. And she'd absorbed so much information about a wide variety of things. She was no expert, but she appreciated and knew how to recognise good workmanship when she saw it. Marcus had kept urging her to take exams, become a fully fledged auctioneer, or a specialist in something, anything, porcelain, silver, or even wine. Do you good to expand your horizons. When she'd told him she was happy as she was, he'd muttered something about her being risk-averse, and stormed away from the conversation. In a light bulb moment, she realised his comment had been true. She didn't take risks in any aspect of her life. She needed security. The security of a job, the security of money in the bank, the security of a loving marriage. Except none of it had quite worked out like it was supposed to, had it? The first of 12 loud dongs from a nearby church clock made Briony jump. Midday. Not normally home at this time, it unexpectedly reminded her of the clock tower in Granny Giselle's small village in the south of France. At this time of day, it was the signal to stop whatever you were doing and make for the village square, to either enjoy a simple aperitif with friends before going home for lunch, or staying to savour the plat du jour with them in the local restaurant. Briony smiled sadly as she remembered how Granny Giselle had often spoken affectionately of the village and her local friends there. The last 18 months living in the UK with Jeanie, her daughter-in-law, had been necessary because of her health. Both Jeanie and Briony had done their best to give her a good, happy life for her final years. But everyone knew how much Giselle missed her homeland, and the dog she'd had to rehome when her health had started to fail. To think, one day next week, she and her mum would be able to join the locals in the village and enjoy a plat du jour, although undoubtedly it would feel strange to be there without Giselle. Everybody would definitely raise a glass to her. Briony turned away from the window. A week's holiday in France would be good for both her and her mum. But before they went, she'd start to put out some feelers amongst her contacts in the auction business, because word would have surely got out about her redundancy. She knew she had a good reputation with lots of auctioneers. Maybe someone would be able to offer her something. Then, when she got back, refreshed and raring to go, she would give all her attention to finding herself a brilliant new job, one that would enable her to buy her dream flat. Jeanie Aubert put the phone down after the conversation with her daughter and ran her hand through her hair distractedly. The last few months had been a difficult time. The death of Giselle Aubert, her mother-in-law, whilst expected, had been hard for both Briony and herself. Briony had lost a beloved grandmother, and Jeanie had mourned, and was still mourning, the loss of a woman she had loved like the mother she'd lost at an early age. From the day Jérôme had taken her home to meet his maman, she and Giselle had taken to each other, and down the years the relationship had become even more special to both women. Briony became the centre of both their lives after Jérôme died 7 years ago, leaving them as a small family unit of 3, with no other relatives. The upcoming visit to France, to sort out and settle Giselle's affairs, although emotionally sad, would also be the ideal time to tell Briony the truth about her grandmother's will. Staying in a place she adored and had always loved visiting would give Briony the time and the space to come to terms with everything that had happened in the last year, and the chance to plan her new future. Poor Briony. So much had gone wrong in her life recently. Jeanie knew that she regarded this redundancy as the final straw. But if Briony did but realise it, the timing was perfect. And then there was her own news she needed to talk to Briony about, and Jeanie couldn't help but wonder about her reaction to learning something that she, Jeanie, had been hugging to herself for a few weeks now. News that could affect both their lives. Jeanie could only hope that things in France would work out the right way for everyone concerned, and that Briony would welcome her own news when she told her. Chapter 3. 1 week later. It was ironic, really, that the 2 letters the La Poste facteur had handed him that morning had arrived in the same post, one with an English stamp, the other with a French one. One with good news, one with something he had no interest in. The English letter was from a TV company, asking him to take part in a programme about veterinary practices in the UK. Elliot stared, dumbfounded, at the words he was reading. Were they crazy? After all he'd been through, when he'd been thrown into the bear pit that was tabloid sensational investigative journalism these days, there was no way he was getting involved with anything that thrust him back into the public's gaze. Screwing up the letter and the envelope, he threw them into the log basket. He wasn't even going to deign to give them an answer. His silence would surely be telling enough. Elliot took a deep breath and opened the French envelope. He took out the letter he'd been waiting for, with a smile on his face. After spending the last 3 months on an intensive French course, he'd passed the government's exam and had the confirmation that he was fluent in French and could now use his Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons qualifications and practice as a vet in France. His enforced sabbatical had come to an end. Finally, he was able to get back to the only job he had ever wanted to do. He'd already put out feelers, and the overworked veterinarian clinic in the nearby small town of Pégomas had promised they would welcome his working presence in the local area as soon as he was legally cleared to work. He couldn't wait to tell them, and Adam and Lucy, the good news. When everything in his life had started falling apart in the last year, Adam and Lucy had welcomed him to the farm, insisting that their home was his for as long as he wanted. Without them on his side, he knew he would have continued in the downward spiral that Robin had thrust him into. He owed them both, big time. Glancing out of his cottage window, he saw Adam and Lucy, with Django, their Australian sheepdog, sitting between them, talking to the scaffolder, removing the scaffolding from the old stable block, now renovated to contain 2 more self-contained gîtes. Elliot knew how much Adam had been looking forward to that milestone being reached. His big brother and his wife had certainly pulled out all the stops with this building project. In the last 5 years, 3 of the smaller individual outbuildings had been rebuilt and turned into artisan workshops. 2 of them were now occupied, a potter in one and a leather worker in the other. Adam was hopeful that the 3rd one would soon be rented out to a local artist. 2 cottages, including the one Elliot now lived in, had been renovated, with Lucy doing the interior design and furnishings of them both. The other cottage, which Lucy had run as a gîte for the first time last summer, had proved to be very popular, and Elliot knew she was hoping for the same success this year. There was still a lot of building work to be done. The 3 or 4 cottages scattered on land further away from the farmhouse, as well as lots of land, including the small vineyard that needed attention, but the rush to get the business off the ground had eased somewhat. The pépinière Adam had been keen to establish was up and running in the field alongside the driveway, with its easy access. Plants, shrubs and olive trees, with terracotta pots and garden statues also on display, were already bringing customers to the farm. Elliot glanced down at Luna, his Weimaraner dog, who was patiently curled up in her basket, watching him for any indication that a walk might be on the cards. Now 5 years old, she'd needed a new home a year or 2 ago, and Adam and Lucy had offered to take her in. Whilst Luna had been no trouble in that short time and seemed happy, she became a different dog when Elliot arrived. She was besotted with him for some reason, and became his shadow, and within days it was clear she regarded him as her master, which Elliot was more than happy to accept. as were Adam and Lucy.
"Shall we go and tell them the good news?"
he said now, opening the door. Luna was instantly at his side, and together they made their way towards the stable block. The last of the scaffolding had been loaded, and Adam shook the hands of both the driver and the scaffolder before the lorry drove out of the farmyard. "You look happy," Lucy said. "Not that you don't, normally these days, but—" She gave Elliot an apologetic look.
"I'm extra happy today," Elliot said. "I've finally got the legal go-ahead to practice in France. Mon français, c'est très bien."
"Oh, that's great news," Adam said. "Well done. We shall look to you now as our in-house language expert to help us translate all our many pages of French bureaucracy that arrive." "Supper tonight with us, to celebrate?" Lucy said.
"Love to."
"Right now, I've got to go and open up Owl's Nest Cottage. Jeannie rang to say she and her daughter are coming over to sort it out, now that Giselle is no longer with us. I guess that means the cottage will be going on the market. Shame. I miss Giselle, even though she was just minutes away via the field track, and 2 kilometres by road. She was our nearest neighbour." Lucy looked at Elliot. "You never met Giselle, did you?" Elliot shook his head.
"No. She'd left before I arrived. I don't think it was personal."
Lucy laughed. "Lovely lady. Her daughter-in-law, Jeannie, seems lovely too. I'll catch up with you two later." Elliot turned to Adam.
"Luna and I are going for a walk. Any chance of you and Django joining us?"
"I was going to take the quad bike and go down to see Bruno in the vineyard. Do me good to walk instead." Together, the brothers began to make their way up through the farmyard, passing the farmhouse, now boasting a new front door and refreshed paintwork. Adam opened a large 5-barred gate that shut the imaginatively named Topfield off from the back of the farmyard. Once in the gently sloping field, they followed the hedge along for several metres before reaching another large gate, which opened into the 8-hectare field with its rows of vines.
"That's a lot of vines. Is it going as planned in the overall scheme of things?"
Elliot asked, looking at the vines stretching right across the field to the bordering hedge.
"It's the most uncontrollable part of the whole project,"
Adam sighed, as he too looked across at the vines.
"It's going to take a lot of work between now and September if we're going to have a chance of making even a litre of wine. The original vines had been sorely neglected before we bought the place, and the harvest for the last 4 years has been pitiful. The late summer storms last year didn't help either." "If you do get a harvest, how will you deal with it? I've never seen any signs of winemaking equipment on the farm."
"Sold off years ago. Wouldn't be up to modern winemaking standards anyway," Adam said. "Initially, we're using the local co-op to deal with the harvest and actually producing the wine for us. I'm holding back on establishing our own winery on the farm in case the vines never recover sufficiently, as winemaking equipment is horrendously expensive. I'm hopeful the new vines, Grenache Noir and Cinsault, we planted and grafted the year after we moved in, will bear fruit this year. On a good note, we do have a large cave under the house that will be perfect for storing any wine that we do make."
"Is Bruno hopeful for a good harvest this year?"
Elliot knew that Adam had to rely on his vigneron's expertise. "Won't commit, one way or the other," Adam said. "Wine growing's in the lap of the gods," is one of his favourite sayings.
"Let's hope God is on your side this summer, then," Elliot said.
"I'm going to walk down to the lake. See you at supper later, if not before." Strolling after Luna as she raced through the adjoining field of spring grass towards the boundary hedge, Elliot smiled happily to himself. Today's letter
meant he could finally start to get his life back on track after all the unexpected changes life had forced on him in the last 12 months. The Robin disaster, giving up his job in the UK, moving to France, and renting one of the renovated cottages on Adam and Lucy's farm were all things he'd never anticipated happening in his life. As always, Luna stopped by the final boundary hedge and sniffed the air before returning to sit at Elliot's side as he stopped to take in his surroundings. Standing, looking out over the French countryside, bathed in sunshine under a perfect blue sky, he reflected that not all the changes had been bad. Moving to France and having Luna adopt him were two of the best. He was happier than he had been in almost a decade, especially now that he had his chosen future in front of him again. He'd phone Julian at the veterinary clinic when he got back to the cottage, tell him the good news, and hopefully start work next week. Elliot bent down to stroke Luna's head before straightening up. "Come on, Luna. Let's get back. I've got an important phone call to make." Chapter 4. Briony held her breath in anticipation as the plane began its descent onto the runway at Nice Airport, glad that Jeannie had the window seat. That way, she could avoid looking out of the window as the sea got closer and closer. In her heart, she knew it was safe. Pilots landed plane after plane here every day of the year. But she'd never get used to how narrow the runway looked from the air, or how close it was to the sea. As the wheels touched down smoothly onto the tarmac and the aircraft slowed and taxied along the runway, Briony exhaled with relief. Jeannie looked at her amused. "That landing still gets you. I love it." "I love flying, but this landing always scares me," Briony admitted. It took them longer to get through customs than Briony remembered it taking in the past. "Still setting up the visa thing we now need in addition to our passport," Jeannie said crossly as they finally made their way to the luggage collection point. "So much red tape these days. Still, we need the security, I suppose." They both waited for their luggage to show up on the conveyor belt before walking through customs and out into the arrivals hall and making for the car hire building to collect car keys. "How lovely of them to upgrade us to a Renault 5 all-electric," Jeannie said, smiling. "Can't wait to drive it. Come on, let's go find it. The man said we can't miss it." The blue sky and the warmth from the afternoon sun as they exited the building hit them both. Briony stopped pushing the luggage trolley and took off her jacket. "Forgotten how warm it is down here, even this early in March. Right, let's find that vehicle." "The man was right," Briony said, laughing a few moments later when they found the car. Bright yellow. It stood out in the rental car park, filled with black and grey vehicles, like the first bright daffodil of spring. "Ooh, I'm looking forward to driving this," Jeannie said. "Unless you want first go. We're both named drivers." "It's fine. You've had more recent experience than me driving on the wrong side," Briony answered, relieved that she didn't have to drive a strange car immediately into the busy traffic that she knew existed outside the airport. Something which didn't seem to bother her mum at all. Humming happily to herself and ignoring the autoroute signs, Jeannie made for the Bord de Mer, and they were soon bowling along, surrounded by traffic, in the direction of Cannes. "After Cannes, we'll take the scenic route up into the back country," Jeannie said. "Oh, it feels so good to be back down here." Briony glanced at her mum. "You're looking forward to this holiday, aren't you?" Jeannie nodded. I've always loved it down here. I'm sorry that Giselle is no longer with us, and I know Owl's Nest is going to feel strange without her there, but..." She shrugged. "It's good to be back." "Have you thought about keeping the cottage as a holiday home?" "No, of course not. Besides, it's out of the question. Things are complicated." There was a certain tightness in her mother's voice that made Briony look at her. "Why is it out of the question? What's complicated? You're on your own. Dad's been gone for 7 years. You can please yourself where you live. You could even move down here permanently if you wanted to." "It's not as simple as that. So much bureaucracy these days after Brexit," Jeanie said, "and right now it's not up for discussion. Another 10 minutes and we should be turning up into the back country. Shall we have some music?" And with that, Jeanie touched the screen in front of her, and Riviera radio was playing. Sitting there, watching the Mediterranean on the left-hand side, glistening in the sunshine, Briony wondered why her mum had suddenly become so uptight about keeping and using the cottage as a holiday or even as a permanent home. There had to be something she wasn't saying. After leaving the Bord de Mer on the other side of Cannes and following the signs for Mougins, they were soon on the quieter country roads leading to Giselle's old village. The old farmhouse, built nearly 200 years ago from local sandstone, with its red-tiled roof, its shutters painted an olive green, and its front door shaded by an ancient wisteria in spring and early summer, was 300 metres or so from the village. Set back from the road, there was a short driveway edged with pretty plumbago shrubs and 1 or 2 palm trees. An outbuilding on the end had been converted into a garage, and Jeanie pulled up in front of it. She turned off the ignition and applied the handbrake on. "That was fun," she announced. "I'm going to enjoy this car whilst we're here." "I'd forgotten how traditional the cottage looks," Briony said, as they got out of the car. "I love the long shape of a traditional Provençal farmhouse." Jeanie held out the front door key. "Open up and let's get our things in. I'm gasping for a cup of tea." Briony pushed the key in the lock and turned it. As the door opened to show the hall with its terracotta-tiled floor, the old-fashioned polished coat stand with its mirror and seat, the wooden staircase with its curved steps at the bottom, she swallowed hard to stop the urge to call out, "Granny Giselle, I'm here!" The house felt strange and empty, as if it was silently waiting to be brought back to life. Quickly, she walked through to the kitchen. On the table was a wicker basket filled with a loaf of rustic bread, some homemade palmier biscuits, tea bags, coffee, tomatoes, lettuce, a jar of olives, a packet of crisps, and some local almonds. A handwritten note was propped up against the basket. "Milk, eggs, cheese, ham, and a bottle of rosé are in the fridge. Do come up to the farm for coffee in the morning. About 10 o'clock? No worries if you've already got plans. Lucy." "That's so kind of Lucy," Jeanie said, coming into the kitchen. "She's been keeping an eye on the place since Giselle came to us. I'm looking forward to seeing how Adam has got on with dragging the farm."